300 miles off the Iranian coast, a row of supertankers sits dead in the water, loaded to the rim, going nowhere. The satellites over Karg Island catch the same image every 6 hours. Storage at 94%. Crude with no buyer, no exit, no ocean to cross. And 40 miles south across the same Gulf, a man in Abu Dhabi just signed the document that put them there. April 28. The United Arab Emirates walks out of OPEC, effective May 1st, 2026. 60 years of cartel discipline gone in a single line of ink. No quotas, no ceilings. No more standing in line behind a club designed to keep its barrels capped, and every Iranian general watching that broadcast knew what it meant before the press conference ended. The Strait Tehran built its empire on just stopped being a weapon. Underneath the Emirati desert, a 248-mile steel artery already runs from the Habshan field to the port of Fujairah on the Sea of Oman. 1.5 million barrels every single day. Outside the strait, outside Iran's gun barrels, outside the IRGC's mining range. The choke point Iran spent 40 years sharpening into a knife is now pressed against its own throat. This is the moment Tehran feared more than airstrikes. Stay locked in to the end, because the trap gets darker as you walk deeper into it. Drop one word in the comments before the next clip. Strait, pipeline, or collapse, and tell me which one breaks the regime first. Tap subscribe, ring the bell, and let's get into the part the cable desk will never say out loud. One question runs underneath everything that follows. When the choke point that made Iran feared turns into the choke point that drowns Iran, what is left of the regime that built itself on it? Suhail al-Mazrouei stood at the lectern in Abu Dhabi and called it a policy move. National interest. A long internal review. That was the diplomatic mass. The strategic face beneath it was harder. The UAE has watched Iran threaten the strait for 40 years while sitting on capacity it was forbidden to use. On April 28, the Emiratis tore up the permission slip. Free of the cap, Abu Dhabi is now driving toward 5 million barrels a day. The capacity has existed for years, locked behind a quota that oil is about to flood a market starved by the Iran war and more. Bypass every buyer Tehran depended on. Every barrel the UAE sends west is a barrel Iran cannot sell east. The geography did the killing. 21 miles wide at its narrowest. The Strait of Hormuz used to be Iran's loaded gun pointed at the world economy. Close it, choke the planet, drag the West to the table. That doctrine is now archived. The Habshan to Fujairah line proves Gulf crude can leave the region without ever entering Iran's reach. And the moment that becomes operationally true, at scale, the threat stops being deterrence. It becomes a bluff with a bill attached. Tehran's generals understand the inversion better than the cable desk does. Mine the strait now, and the only hulls that explode are Iranian. Sink a tanker now, and the only crude that burns is the top cargo Tehran needed to sell yesterday. The blade points the wrong way. Every move the IRGC drilled for 40 years cuts the hand that holds it. Karg Island is where the bluff comes due. Roughly 90% of Iranian crude exports load through this single piece of rock. Bloomberg, Kepler, and Vortexa read the same satellite frame. Tanks full, tankers loaded, 12 to 22 days. Before the entire export system seizes itself shut, the American counterblockade switched on April 13th. Every tanker headed for an Iranian port now gets flagged, hailed, and turned. The shadow fleet still squeezes through the seams, but the corridor that used to be open water is now a gauntlet, and the seams are closing one by one. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent put a price on the silence, $170 million a day. That is the regime's hemorrhage, while its barrels rot offshore. The IRGC's regional empire was financed by that flow. Hezbollah's arsenal was financed by that flow. The Houthis ate from that flow, and the flow has stopped. Sunday night on Fox News, Donald Trump leaned into the camera and gave Tehran a number of his own. 3 days after that, he said the pipelines rupture. And once they rupture, you do not rebuild. What was energy experts at the Washington Post pushed back hard on the 72-hour line? The political theater was loud. The engineering threat underneath it was real. An Iranian oil well is not a faucet. You do not flip a switch and call the pressure back. The fields run on aging reservoirs, decades of sanction-starved infrastructure, and depleted secondary recovery. Force a shut-in across hundreds of wells in a country that cannot import the technology to revive them, and a percentage of those wells become tombstones in the desert. Permanent. That is the trap with no exit. Keep producing. The tanks burst. Stop producing. The reservoirs die. Either path bleeds Tehran in a different vein, and the UAE's pipeline is the reason both veins are open at once. If Abu Dhabi were not absorbing the global market gap, the world would be screaming for Iranian crude right now, and OPEC would be on its knees begging Tehran to keep pumping. Instead, Riyadh and Abu Dhabi together are filling the hole, and the world has stopped flinching every time an IRGC commander threatens the strait. Then the second clock arrived. April 21st, the Bay of Bengal, not the Persian Gulf, not the strait. Indo-Pakistan walked onto the MT Tifani, a sanctioned tanker carrying Iranian crude, 2,000 miles from Hormuz, and took the ship without firing a shot. The escape route the Shadow Fleet relied on for years just stopped being an escape route. That was the message Tehran could not afford to receive. The strait was already closed. Now even the long way around, the Indian Ocean lanes, Iranian smugglers, had used for years, was a kill zone with American boots on the deck. The map shrank in a single afternoon. The proxies were always the empire. Tehran did not build armies abroad. Tehran built payrolls. Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Iraqi militias, the Syrian remnants, they fought because when the wages stop, the empire stops. And the wages lived inside the 90% of crude moving through Karg. On April 24th, the U.S. Treasury froze $344 million of cryptocurrency tied to Iran. The guards had moved to stablecoins because the wires were already blacklisted. That door slammed too. Tether wallets frozen mid-transfer. The digital backdoor closed inside a single news cycle. And the cable desk will tell you Hezbollah is finished. The cable desk is half right. On April 28th, an Israeli soldier died in southern Lebanon, 6 others wounded. The weapon was a small fiber optic guided drone, hand-built, almost impossible to jam. Hezbollah is degraded. Hezbollah is also still putting an Israeli mother on the evening news, holding a folded flag. When organizations bleed cash, they get clever. Fiber optic drones are the calling card of an outfit that cannot afford precision missiles anymore. Cheap, deniable, designed for a war footing built on scraps. That is what Iran's proxies look like under collapse. Weaker, meaner, and more desperate than they were a year ago. The Houthis tell the same story in a different register, with Red Sea attacks down roughly 84% compared to last year, and salvos thinning by the week, not gone, fading. Now look at what the Gulf is doing while Tehran chokes. Saudi Arabia watches its oldest enemy lose the funding that armed the Houthis to threaten Riyadh's airports. The UAE is consolidating energy hub status from Fujairah to Jebel Ali. Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, all aligning behind a regional security wall. The 40-year encirclement Tehran feared is closing at the exact moment Tehran cannot afford to push back. The UAE's signature was not just an oil decision. It was a security signal to every neighbor to Iran ever bullied. Abu Dhabi told the Gulf in one document that the era of bowing to Tehran's choke point, blackmail, is finished. Every emirate, every Saudi prince, every Kuwaiti minister read it the same way. The wall that took 40 years to build went up in a week. Then the cameras turned to Tehran, and the regime did something it had never done. On April 26, President Masoud Pezeshkian went on national television and asked Iranians to cut their electricity use. The deputy energy minister offered households a 30% discount on their bill in exchange for slashing consumption. A government that funded wars in 3 countries was now bargaining with grandmothers over kilowatt hours. The street heard it for what it was, a confession. The same regime that lectured Iranians for decades about resistance economics and divine endurance was now begging apartment blocks to switch off the air conditioning. The young generation has been doing this math for years. They watched billions vanish into Lebanese tunnels and Yemeni rocket racks while their savings evaporated into a rial, trading at over $1 million to the dollar. Pakistan tried to broker the deal. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were on the runway to Islamabad. Trump pulled them mid-trip after Iran's foreign minister walked out at the table for the second time. The signal to Tehran could not have been colder. We are not negotiating anymore. We are waiting, and the waiting was the weapon. There was no bombing campaign for the supreme leader to rally around, no martyr to parade across state television. Just the silent pressure of full tanks, frozen wallets, and a clock running down by the hour. That kind of pressure does not produce defiant speeches. It produces fractures inside the regime nobody on the outside can see yet. And then there was Beijing, the last name on Tehran's friend list. For years, Chinese teapot refiners bought Iranian crude at $8 to $10 below Brent. That discount was the deal. That discount made sanctions worth defying. By April, the discount had inverted into a premium. Iranian oil now costs more, not less. The math that justified the risk was finished. Now overlay the UAE's exit on that ledger. Beijing was suddenly being offered a clean replacement, legal supply, no sanctions exposure, predictable shipping, and a producer racing toward 5 million barrels a day with no quota holding it back. China rarely announces pivots. China watches and recalculates and moves quietly. The spreadsheet on the desk in Beijing was already drifting away from Tehran. Moscow, drowning in its own war, had nothing to send. The picture clicks into place when you stop looking at it as separate stories. The strait, the pipeline, the pen, the tanks, the Tifani, the drones, the frozen tether, the premium that used to be a discount. They are one event viewed from 6 different windows. Iran built a doctrine on the assumption that it could hurt the world more than the world could hurt it back. The UAE rewrote that assumption in a single afternoon, and everything else collapsed along the equation. A pen in Abu Dhabi did what no aircraft carrier has done in 40 years. It took the gun out of Tehran's hand without firing once. Picture the room in Tehran tonight. The lights low because the grid is rationed. The map still pinned to the wall. The IRGC commanders staring at a strait that no longer answers to them, and a sea route that no longer hides them. Somewhere on that wall is a circle drawn around Hormuz in red marker. Drawn there decades ago by a younger general who believed it was the most valuable piece of water on earth. It still is. It just stopped belonging to them. If you got this far, you already see the picture the news desk refuses to draw. Tap that subscribe button, hit the like, and stay close. The next breakdown drops while Tehran is still reading the room.